Hi everyone, Krista Moser here. Today I thought I'd show you how to bind inside angles. I've got a couple quilts here that show you what an inside angle is, and it's the peak and then the valley. Some quilts that have scalloped borders or scalloped edges where you've got a real point here, this little point seems to be difficult to bind for a lot of people, so I thought I would show you all my tips and tricks for binding those inside angles, and of course the outside angles too. Those are a little easier to do. Now the last pattern that I showed you was my City Girl chevron. That has inside angles because it has a scalloped edge. So I've quilted that sample and I thought I would use it as my example for the binding. Here we have that quilt from the last video. Didn't it turn out cool? Alright, so I've got my scalloped edge, my zigzag border edge here on the top and bottom of this quilt, and so these little valleys are the things that we're going to focus on today. What a lot of people do is they will do a little fold here. This is pretty typical when you're binding outside angles, whether it's a straight quilt where you've got to bind off the corners. The outside angles are easy. There's a fold of fabric there that gets you a nice smooth transition around the corner. The inside angle, what happens is people tend to try and fold something in there. You end up with a wad of fabric and it's lumpy. And so what we're going to do is not fold but bend. And I'm going to show you everything that I do to get that to be a nice smooth transition. Okay, so I tend to do my bindings from the back of the quilt and then I roll them to the front and I top stitch them down. So if you sew your bindings to the top of your quilt and roll it to the back and then hand stitch it, you're going to do this very same process but kind of in the reverse. So I've got you looking at the back side of the quilt here, and it's a gray flannel backing. So I'm going to use some rulers to mark my intersections for my binding pivots. Okay, here we have. I'll mark the outside angles first and show you how that works, and then we'll get to the inside angle. So what I've got is just a small ruler, and I tend to sew my bindings on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I make my bindings 2 1/4 inches, and by cutting them 2 1/4 inches, it's a really nice tight filled binding when I go to stitch it all the way around. So what I'm going to do here is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or just kind of marking one. And I'm using just a black marker so you can see. You see that little dash line there? So I laid the ruler with the 1/4 inch line down the edge of my point, just like that. Drew a little line. And do the same thing here. 1/4 inch. Draw another line so I have somewhat of an X, like an X marks the spot. I'm using a marker so you can really see, but you can use a fabric marking pin. If your backing is lighter, you can see it with a lighter colored pin. I'll do this one too, same story. 1/4 inch line, just a dash. Mark it a little better. Okay, and then coming up the edge, same thing. So I have an X of my angle. Now, for the inside point, same thing, 1/4 inch line on the edge of the quilt. Here we go. And then the other direction. That's going to be my point. That's the pivot point right there. Now let me show you, if you have the 60-degree diamond rulers, either one of them, the mini or the regular size, they have a dot at the 1/4 inch right here. So you can nest these things right into the edge of your point and just put your pin right through that hole. Dot. When I get to the inside one, it's a little bit different. I'm going to line up, in this case, my 1/4 inch line that's on the ruler. I'm just going to move it in another 1/4 inch, and there's a starburr line here, so you can kind of see that. Each ruler has the same feature. And that moves my dot in 1/4 inch. And I will just put my pin through the hole, and there's my dot. These are my pivot points right here. Okay, I've got a few of those marked. One more thing I'm going to do. Take my scissors. This is for the inside points only. And I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to snip. Not all the way to my line, but maybe 2/3 of the way. Just give myself a little clip. The reason for this, when I go to sew my binding on here and I get to this pivot point, I'm going to drop my needle and I am going to bend it. But I kind of want the advantage to be able to almost pry this open. So as I'm bending my strip around, it'll pry it open a little bit, making a nice even transition. I'm going to snip the next one. Not quite to the dot, but just about. There it is. Okay. All right, now for the binding. I'm going to start my binding on this outside edge. And the reason for that, so when I got done with the binding all the way around and I go to join the two ends together, I can do that pretty easily out here on the outside edge. So I'm just going to start. This binding's got a lot of fraying going on, so I'll have to watch that. I'm going to put a straight pin where my X is. That will be kind of my first pivot point. So I'm just going to put a straight pin in there to get my start, but I'm going to start back here about 5 or 6 inches and leave that tail open to join the ends together. Okay, we've got it all set up. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine. Okay, so here we are at the machine. I'm going to start back here about 6 inches from the first point, that outside point. Doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance with my 2 1/4 inch cut binding. Right up to that point. Now here is what I'm looking for, that first X. That's where I'm going to drop the needle. So I'm going to put my straight pin there and drop my needle. Look, good enough. Now I'm going to turn this whole piece, and so this first outside corner I'm just going to stitch right off the point. Just like that. So you have just this angle and then you stitch right off that point. And the reason I do that is that way I can start now down the other side. And I'm going to take and fold this corner. Get myself lined up with the raw edge down the next side. And I'm going to start off the quilt and stitch onto the quilt. Headed for the next corner, which is also an outside corner. Then we'll get to the inside corner, which is probably why you're here. Okay, here again, looking for that X. I'm going to use my stiletto. There's my X. So I'm just going to put the stiletto point. There we go. Tilt it out. Here, second outside point, stitch down and right off the edge of the quilt. Now, turn the binding. Raw edge again. Nice little neat fold here. Okay, inside angle, straight ahead. Looking for my X. Again, I like to use my stiletto. It actually is like a second hand. Just real pointy. Okay. there's the point. Dropped my needle, and now I'm going to open this up. So open this up and get my fabric lined up, the raw edge with the next side. The pivot coming right out. The other side. Here it is. See that? Nice bend. So when I wrap it around to the other side, it's a nice, clean bend. We fold at the outside corners and we bend at the inside corners. I'll do this one more time. For my X, my dot. Stretch your foot up. Open this up. And out the back side. Here it is again. And that little clip, that helps this inside angle just open right up, so you're almost like you're just sewing your binding straight on. There's a little bit of a V there. Just remember, your inside angles are bends, no folds here. And by doing that little clip, you can really get it to open right up. Okay. Now that we've got it all sewn all the way around, you can see here my points, my outside points with their little folds, and the inside points with the bends. Just like this. Now I'm going to flip it over. And this is where really see how that little clip will help to alleviate any pressure on your binding, so you get a nice even crease in the valleys. So we go through, and in my case I'm going to top stitch this, so I go through and kind of pin it in place. The outside points, they get folded like a typical binding. I'll do this way. There we go. Fold it up. And kind of get that one to match. And then the inside with their little valleys. You can use the nose of your iron too to press this out. Once you've done your stitching, hand stitching or top stitching, you can kind of press this out and get a nice sharp crease. Works really, really well. Now if you want a video on joining the ends together, I did one of those several months back. It's called Folded Corner Clipper Binding Trick. It's excellent because if you want a foolproof way to join the ends of your binding when you've sewn all the way around and you want to get those ends to join together, that trick will make it smooth without extra fabric. Everything works out really well. Your bindings will be beautiful in no time. Okay, so one other thing. So this is the City Girl chevron pattern. It's what's hanging behind me. Here's a copy of it. You've probably seen that from the last video. And then another thing is this gold fabric, the gold shimmery fabric that I used as my accent piece in this quilt. We actually have it in stock now. It showed up, and so we have it for sale in the shop at KristaMoser.com. If you didn't find an accent piece that you liked more, and you got one of the fabric bundles for this quilt, and you want to add the gold to it, then just go to KristaMoser.com and look in the shop, and we've got the gold fabric is here. The shimmery gold metallic is here. And one more thing. Oh, this we've put together as a PDF download. This binding inside angles. We've got it as PDF download. So if you prefer pictures and text, we'll put a link to that in the description of this video. And then you can just kind of go through it step by step. You can watch the video, of course, but we'll put the PDF download. You can print it off, or you can just kind of scroll through it and watch each step that I showed you to get your perfect inside angles. I hope you found something helpful here. Thanks for watching.